Hello everyone. So today we're going to be talking about how to work with polymer clay. So this is the oven baked clay or sculpey. There's many different kinds, um, but the main distinguishing features is that it's uh, oven baked clay. So you can have it be completely white, or you can get it in a variety of colors. I'm going to be mostly working with a variety of colors today. I have some things I already made before. Um, for examples, and then I'm going to be making some examples for you to see how I do that for like different techniques. I'm going to show you how to make some polymer clay beads. You can make whatever colors, sizes, textures that you want. So first what we're going to do is we're going to take some wire. We're going to make it as straight as possible. You can actually get kits from the store that already have things that are made for exactly what this wire is for. This is going to be used to create the hole that is in the beads. There are kits that do so. There's even kits that allow you to have these bead rollers. They are really useful for a variety of things, including making traditional rosary beads out of actual roses. So if that's something that you're interested in, or if you are interested in making lots and lots of polymer clay beads, that might be something that you get at some point. But I'm going to show you how to do it with just wire, so you don't have to worry about trying to get extra materials that you might not have. So first, what you're going to do is you're going to take your clay, you pick some colors that you like. This I made earlier is a marbleization of red, purple, and blue all together. And then you're going to take it. The warmer it is, the easier it is to work with. But if it gets too warm, it starts to get sticky. And then, eventually it'll bake it. If your clay is old, it will start to crumble. There's things you can get that are supposed to like rehydrate it. It's this oil. I have used it for some things, but it's more useful for working with liquid polymer clay, which is another great jewelry making tool. So I made my little ball of clay. I take the wire. I push it through. I fix the ball of clay because no matter how you do it, your ball of clay is always going to be slightly damaged by being punctured. The sharper the wire you have, the easier it will be. Also, the thinner the wire you have. But I was trying to make larger holes for the balls because it's easier to use them if they have a larger hole. So you can make a bunch of them and stick them all on here to bake. So when you bake them, to avoid having it on the shiny foil and having like partially flat or shiny side, what you can do is you can either create something out of foil that holds this up, or if you have any metal things that you can like prop it up on in the oven, so that when you bake it, it doesn't have anything touching it, so it doesn't change the texture at all. So you can just make a bunch of those. So I'm just going to make a bunch of those off camera real quick. While you're making your beads, think about ways you can use your environment around you to help. Like if you want to have flattened edges, you can push it down into like a flat surface. So you basically just take your clay, hold it tightly, but not to the point where you're actually putting enough pressure to change its shape. Then you push down on a surface, and I'll take the shape of that surface. Like if I want to have this slightly round, I could push it against this tool to create a slight curved edge. Think about like the tools you have around, including even just your fingers. Think about how you want to pinch it to create a shape, how you can roll it. You can create different shapes, not just round. You can create shapes like this, where it's like kind of oblong. You can create chains. You can create a bunch of things. If you want, you could even create a solid snake of clay. If you have like a really thick one, then you can like cut it into like slices, which is very interesting. That's how you can create very similar, if almost identical, pieces. But if you want to create something square, have a nice swirl going. Look at that. What I do is I squish it between my fingertips after rolling into a ball. Then I press it against the counter, going in one direction, rotating it for each side. And it creates a rounded square. You can also use things like cookie cutters or even smaller things in order to cut the shape that you want. So just look around and see what things you can use to create shapes. So for textures in Polymer clay is really great at taking textures. Like when you push your thumb into it, you'll notice that it will have the texture of your fingerprint inside of it, which is really cool that you can like literally leave your mark on clay like that. But you can also use other things to create marks. So you can use things to create textures. You can also use tools like this. So this is something that I made beforehand. It's a little fox mask for a future demo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to score the surface using the bladed side in order to create a fur-like texture. There's a variety of tools you can use. You can use many ceramic tools as well, or other kinds of tools in order to create different textures. You're only limited by what you can think of. This is a tool that I've used since I was in high school. That's why it looks a little damaged at this point. I've had them for many years. I don't know if it shows up on camera, but there is a texture. There we go. That's reminiscent of fur now on that mask. You can do other things too to create interesting textures and shapes. You can create roses by putting small pieces together, which I will show you how to do in a little while. You can also combine different pieces to create things. Keep in mind you can twist the different pieces together to create textures similar to this. You can press pieces together. You can even like use molds and stuff. So get creative with how you want your Polymer clay works to look. And then keep in mind that other things you can add to it. You can add metal, which can go in the oven if it's, as long as it's not like metal with very low melting point, which most metals you're going to have around your house are going to be fine in the oven. You can add powdered pigments like makeup actually onto your clay to give it a different look. You can add paint after you are done firing it or baking it, I guess. This cannot be fired in a kiln. It will melt and leave a interesting residue, so I don't recommend doing that because it is plastic-based clay. But look around, see if there's anything that you want to use to create like an interesting texture. You can even use objects to press into them, like seashells. So if I flatten a piece of clay, now it's all smooth and flat. If I press the shell into it and peel it away, it now has the texture of a shell. So think about what cool textures you have around your house that you can use for this. One person wants to know how you can smooth out the Polymer clay so it doesn't have a texture other than smooth. You can use something that looks like a spoon. It's kind of like burnishing clay. I use the backside of this because I find it very useful. And basically just very lightly press into the clay to smooth it out. You can also use it to take an edge if you want to combine two edges. Hold it like that so you can see better. You can push it in. It allows it to have like an edge that doesn't have like a defined separation point. It blends them together so there's no real defined, this is where this part ends, this is where this part begins. So it takes a while to smooth out the clay, and you want to touch it as little as possible after you smooth it out because it's so easy to leave your fingerprints on the clay, which, you know, undoes everything you just did. So you're going to take a while to smooth it back out. There are some tools that you can get that are meant for this. There are tools with rubber ends that are great for smoothing out clay, including ceramics. I have many of these tools that I've talked about for ceramics. I mean, I can wash them off and use them for this, but I'm just lazy. So as I'm taking my time and smoothing things out, I am watching carefully to make sure that my fingerprints aren't being put back onto the object I'm trying to smooth. Do you see how smooth that is in like the light? That's just me with going over it, kind of burnishing it. Other things that you can think about that you might want to do is creating flat sides by pushing objects into it. Like if I take the side of this blade and press it in, I can create flat sides that can mimic a gem-like shape into the clay. Now, if you want to use polymer clay to make a pendant, think about where you want the hole to be, like which direction you want to be. Because if you make a hole, say this is my pendant, and I make a hole straight through like this, that is going to make it so it will stay like this on a string unless I have a jump ring. So think about your design when you are creating things, especially with how you want to place holes or other things. If you want, you can even pre-attach certain pieces, like certain things, like you can pre-attach metal or jump rings or pieces of wire to allow it to be used for jewelry. So this one I'm going to pierce from the side so I do not have to have a jump ring if I do not choose to. So I have my nice string of beads that twirls. And this is what I'm going to be baking, along with some of the other things I pre-made. For making other kinds of sculptural pieces, first step one, pick out your clay, pick out what colors you want. You can obviously combine colors into new colors. It's going to take a while to thoroughly mix it. So maybe like find a cool video, spend like 5 or 10 minutes mixing the clay. It's going to be a little tough on your hands, especially like the harder the clay is. So warm it up between your hands first, or if it's like a brand new package, you can like stick it in your pocket or something for a little while you walk around to like get it warm, because the warmer the clay is, the easier it's going to be to manipulate. The colder it is, the harder it's going to be to manipulate. So keep that in mind. If you want a piece to remain like really hard while you're working with it, you might want to like put it in the fridge or freezer for a few minutes if you want to make sure it does not lose its shape at all. So I'm warming this up in my hands, and now it's nice and soft and squishy. So first I'm going to show you how to make things like flowers and roses. So if you want, so the size that you use will determine how big the overall flower is. So if you want like a really small rose, you're going to use this just like on a smaller scale. You're going to take small pieces of clay. I'm going to do it a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm doing. So you're going to take a piece of clay, and you're going to squish it between your hands, and you're going to squish, squish, squish with your fingers. To start the center of the flower, I have this flattened piece that I'm going to roll. This will be my center. I'm going to set that aside as I start to make some petals. So make sure that the petals that you make are in scale. So try to grab pieces that are a little bit smaller than your first piece. That first piece needs to be able to roll around and have like a defined center. So I'm flattening each piece because then I'm just going to combine them all into the rose afterwards. You can also add the pieces as you're working and then just combine them all as you make them instead of waiting until the end. Like, doop, doop. Set it aside, make new pieces. But each time you set it down, make sure you set it down gently, because if you set it down too rough, you might damage the petals you already have. If they squish together, then you have to restart entirely because you won't be able to get them back apart. That is the one downside to working with warm clay, is that it's easier for the clay to be squished by accident and stick to other clay you don't want to stick to. So you can see the shape of the rose is starting to form. When I'm done with it, I'm going to take the edges and like roll them back slightly to give them a more defined edge. Kind of like this, right? Take them back, go. It opens the flower up and makes it look wider, even if it's not as wide as it appears. It also looks more realistic because like the petals are going to open wide for like birds and bugs to like come get pollen. So if you're not sure like what colors you want to do, or like if you want to look up reference photos, obviously you're more than welcome to like look up reference photos. It's great to have a reference for when you're working with something, especially if you're trying to reference something in nature. You can use similar techniques to create any kind of flower. I recommend just looking at photos of whatever you want to make and thinking before you start to create how you would make the individual pieces and how would you put them together. So we have a nice rose. Now, to make sure they stay together, I'm going to pinch the back end and squish it a little bit to combine all of the like back of the petals, and squish and squish and squish. So I'm like literally just rotating back and forth and squishing it. So then the back end is like all nice and like one piece, but the front still has a bunch of separate lovely petals. Now with this, you can either use it as is, you can take the back off using a blade and then add things for like the stem, or you can make petals. It's entirely your choice. You can also use something I mentioned before. You can use old or not very expensive makeup palettes. You can use those to add more colors. So if you didn't want to add more colors using paint or by mixing more colors together, then you can take makeup palette and take a brush and brush it on. You can do this before you bake it, and it will be a little bit stronger because it will bind more. It'll be a little less strong after you bake it, but you can still do it if you want more subtle or powdery colors. You see how different the color of like the makeup is? So if you want to have like colors on like the edges, let's do a pink maybe. And dust it. You can use it to add like a slight shine or shimmer. It's entirely up to you. You are the artist, and you know what you want to make. No one else can tell you what you're going to make. Just like a slight bit of color to some of the edges. While working, think about like all the different textures you want to use. So make sure you have your textures nice and like finished. And then for some of the textures, you might want to consider using the batting technique I mentioned earlier, because whatever side you put on the tray will end up slightly flattened and a little bit shiny. So say for this paintbrush, if I want to make sure that is entirely round, what I would do is I would put it on batting instead of putting it directly on here. But by putting it directly on here, it takes the risk that as the oven heats up the clay and the clay gets a little bit softer, it might lose a little bit of its shape and like melt slightly to the point where it has that shiny edge on just one little part. I've seen it many, many times. It looks very interesting for like some creations and a little confusing sometimes. Sometimes it just doesn't look right, you know? But it's entirely up to you. You are the artist. You can make tiny creations. You can make bigger creations. So for making bigger creations, what you're going to want to do is you can use styrofoam inside of the clay to hold its shape while also not making the clay as thick. So, for example, this is a pomegranate I'm in the process of making. So I'm carving out floral foam to act as like the center, and I'm going to encase it in clay to have it so the clay is not nearly as thick. You want to make sure that's thick enough that it will cover the entirety. And occasionally, very rarely, you'll have it break open, but that doesn't happen very often. In the hundreds of times that I've used foam in the center, I've only had it break twice. So It works most of the time. So as always, there's always some things that can go wrong for no real apparent reason. There's probably some reason, I just don't know it. So while you're making things, always plan ahead, always think ahead about what you want to do. So for baking the polymer clay beads, what I'm currently doing is I'm making a little stand to put the bead wire on. So I'm doing is I'm folding it in half, and then I'm going to fold two edges up. I'm going to lay it down the counter first so this bottom edge is flat. I'm squishing it down, I'm folding it. I'm making sure to crease the folds so they're nice and straight, like that. And then I'm going to push these two sides together. I'm going to bend them one direction, then bend them the other direction. So what that looks like is I'm bending it this way. Actually, we'll leave it there for right now because this one doesn't have as much excess as the first one did. Okay. So now I have two little things to put on my baking tray to make sure that the wire doesn't touch the baking tray. Make sure your beads are more towards the center because if they're too off balance, it might cause some issues. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pre-foiled baking tray, put the two ends down, and then put the wire in between. I'll show you what it looks like in just a second. Now my pendant is touching the baking tray, but that's okay. You see that? But the rest of my beads are not, so they will stay nice and stay their shape. Now the rest of these pieces I'm just going to put on the baking tray. You'll be able to see some of like that shininess I was talking about earlier. All these pieces I pre-made in order for another demo that I'm going to be filming afterwards. Now some of these pieces are really, really small, so they're easy to lose track of. So just try to remember like what all you put on the tray. If you need to, make a note or like multiple notes about what all you were putting in there. So for baking, what you're going to do is you're going to preheat your oven to 275. You're going to wait until it's entirely done heating. You're going to put it in. You're going to put your clay in. Now the thicker clay is going to need more time than thinner clay. So keep that in mind. So if you have clay that's a quarter of an inch thick, it's going to take like 15, 20-ish minutes. An easy way to see if your clay is done baking is to take it out of the oven using oven mitts or hot pads so you don't burn yourself. And then you can take like a, kind of like you're baking like a brownie or something, you take a toothpick or a tool and you lightly press into the clay where like if you damage the clay, it won't matter as much. Like if you can like flip it over and like use the back, you can see if it presses easily into the clay like it's still moldable or if it doesn't. Until the clay cools, it will still have a slight give to it, but you're trying to see if it will give so easily that it keeps a shape pressed into it like that. So for thinner clay, it's a little bit harder to know how long to bake it, so just keep an eye on it. Maybe set a timer to check it every few minutes. It's very, very easy to burn small pieces. I have more than once accidentally tried to bake small pieces and big pieces at the same time. I would say separate those out. Bake your small pieces first, and make sure you keep a really close eye on smaller pieces, and then bake larger pieces later. Other things you can do with wire and polymer clay is you can use them as armatures. Like if you want to make sculptures that are larger, you can use wire to act as an armature with polymer clay. You can use it to make, I've seen people use it to make dolls. I've used it to make kind of like metal stands, basically, that the clay is strung between for art pieces. I'll see if I can like find any pictures of some of the things I've made. Yeah, it's very easy to burn clay though, so keep a really close eye on it. I once had a tray full of like 40 rat sculptures and I burned almost all of them. It's very sad when you do that because you can't really fix that. You can try to paint over it, but while my clay is baking, I'm going to show you something that I made like a few years ago. It's been a little bit damaged because it's hard to not have things get damaged over time, especially when you're not storing them properly. Ways to prevent polymer clay from getting damaged, especially if you're moving or anything like that, is to like make sure that you have tissue paper, and you pack it in, wrap it up, and like make sure that it has like a nice box to live in. So this is an example of something that has like an armature. There is metal wire inside. You can see it in the broken hand actually. There's like a slight bit of the metal showing. And that's how I end up making like the arms stand. I have the hands, they're just not attached anymore. They're missing a little bit of fingers. But you can see like I use an armature to create this piece, and then there's actually foam inside the head to allow to have like this piece that had like more uniform thickness. Because if I had these thinner pieces like the fingers and stuff along with this thicker head, it's greater chance that the fingers will burn before the head is finished baking. So you can see there's lots of elements going on here. I made this 4 years ago. It's survived a couple of moves with only, losing a couple hands and a little bit some fingers. There's actually a finger still here. It's a little creepy actually. You can see like there's like a flatness to the back of the head. And then sometimes for some of my sculptures, I will have like ear piercings or like metal in the clay like meant to be shown. So make sure that when you choose a metal, you choose a metal that can go in the oven. So make sure it doesn't have like some kind of covering or coating that will burn in the oven. So maybe test a small piece before you put it in your piece. Throw it in the oven for a little while, so make sure it doesn't do anything. And then other things to keep in mind while working with clay. Clay and plastic, certain kinds of plastic, do not go together. Over time, the clay, even after it's baked, will react to certain kinds of plastic and melt the plastic. Somewhere I have like this little tiny plastic seahorse bead that I used to press into the clay, and I left it for a few years in a bag full of clay, and it's entirely melted. It's just sticky goo. It's really gross, so I don't recommend it. So I've seen people on the internet use plastic beads as like eyes and stuff, which looks really cool until the plastic starts reacting, and it's a very unpleasant texture when you touch it by accident, and it starts to like dissolve and it's stuck to your finger and you can't get it off. It's very unpleasant, and it ruins your sculpture because you can't remove this clay plastic mixture. Like you're stuck with it. You can't remove it. I've never successfully done so. Even from baked clay, it will very slowly react. So if you're going to be using plastic, make sure that you use the plastic just as a texture or something like that, and then you wash off the plastic, because if you leave bits of clay, you're going to dissolve your plastic, and if you're trying to use it like I was with the seahorse, you're going to be very disappointed when you go to use your seahorse and it's a melted puddle of goo. It's very disappointing. So don't use plastic. I don't know, because like plastic bags seem to be fine, but most plastic beads will melt over time. So don't use plastic and clay, just unless you know for sure that it's not going to react. And I cannot tell you which kinds react. I don't know for sure. This is all from personal experience of ways that I have ruined many sculptures. It's very disappointing, so I don't recommend that. You can see on this, you can see like some of the shiny bits where I use the um, makeup pigments. Same with like the tongue. The tongue is entirely colored by those pigments. There is no paint on this. This is all just polymer clay and makeup. You can see the lips. The lips are covered in a thin layer of makeup to like make them have like that slightly different color that human lips have. When you're mixing clay, if you're trying to like make a skin tone, make sure you combine, like you can get skin tones, but if you want to make your own, make sure you combine lots of different colors. Like think about like the undertones that you want. Like this has like a warm undertone. And then think about other things that are going to be in skin. Like there's wrinkles in skin. There's birthmarks and moles on skin. So the more details you add of things that even that aren't necessarily considered beautiful will make your work much better. It'll make it more realistic and more beautiful. Such as like things like laugh lines, wrinkles, folds of skin. Like look, when you're making something, look at a reference. It is the most beneficial thing you can do is look at a reference. For when you're done working, it's important that you clean up properly. So things like putting your clay in plastic bags. Hopefully you keep the same colors together because otherwise the clay can like mix before you want to. So make sure you put your clay in plastic bags, squeeze the air out, and seal it because even though it's not air dry clay, it will live longer and last longer if you seal it properly. So then it doesn't dry out and get crumbly and then you can't use it anymore. The older clay is and like the more crumbly it is, the easier it will also burn in the oven. Another thing to keep in mind is make sure you to wash your hands when you're done. It's very important all the time for any reason, especially with things that have residue that is not safe for human consumption. So make sure you wash your hands and put away all your materials. And all your tools too. Now that everything's done baking, you can see that everything is nice and hard. It's all cooled, by the way. I'm not touching really hot clay and really hot metal. So I have these pieces, so you can just slide them off the wire. If you have difficulty, you might need to like bend the wire or shift them or spin them a little bit, because it might have, shifted slightly. The baking process and need a little help. Sound effects definitely help. It's proven. So I have my beads with pre-made holes all completed. And then I also baked everything else at the same time. So I have all these lovely pieces for my next demo. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to be safe and to have lots of fun. Thank you all. Bye-bye.